Well, good morning and welcome. Let's go ahead and get ourselves started for this morning. So this is Political Science 1. This is class number 30620. My name is Paul Savoy, and this is our weekly Zoom get-together. It is Tuesday, the 19th of May, 2020, and several things that we're going to go ahead and accomplish this morning. In just a couple of minutes, I'm going to go over some announcements and reminders regarding the class. Since we are getting to the last couple of weeks of the semester, want to remind you about some upcoming due dates, kind of the semester wrap-up stuff, that sort of thing. Once we do that, I'll then go ahead and ask for any questions that you might have regarding the current topic that you are learning about this week. That is the judicial branch, the third of the three national government branches, created by the framers in Article 3 of the Constitution, not surprisingly, and the discussion forum post on the judicial branch, which is your next assignment that will be due in this class, coming up this Thursday at 11:59 p.m., not counting the grace period. So I'll deal with any questions that you have regarding the judicial branch, and I'll briefly recap the two most important points that I highlighted last week as we were going over the judicial branch notes together from Canvas. And then finally, I'll deal with the last thing that I'll deal with any remaining time that we have together this morning is to talk a little bit, kind of highlight some of the important stuff in the next topic, the next set of notes that you will be learning about into next Thursday. And that is really the last set of new material that we'll be dealing with for this class, for this semester. And that is, in a sense, bringing this class back full circle to where we started back in February. And that is to talk a little bit about the nature of our basic freedoms as folks living in the United States. So we're going to talk a little bit about civil liberties and civil rights. And the main points that I'll emphasize with you this morning is the fact that civil liberties and civil rights are both aspects of our basic freedoms. They are in many ways connected with each other and related to each other, but they are also distinct concepts. So we have two very distinct types of freedoms as folks living in the United States. And so I'll draw that distinction in more detail and also talk a little bit about how and why we know what our basic freedoms consist of as folks living in the United States. That pretty much is the agenda for this morning. So before we do anything else, just a reminder, as always, this meeting is being recorded, and you can go ahead and review this recording, all or in part, by simply going to our class Canvas homepage, clicking on the ConferZoom link in the left-hand main menu towards the bottom of the menu. And once you get to our ConferZoom page for this class, simply click on the link labeled recordings and then scroll down to the link for the date of the recording that you want to review. And it's as simple as that. Also, questions and comments are welcome throughout our presentation this morning. If you have them, feel free to either unmute your mic, ask your question, make your comment, or if you would prefer, if you'd be more comfortable, you can go ahead and put your question or comment in the group chat. I will acknowledge it and respond to it from there. So let's go ahead, first of all, and talk about some announcements and reminders. So you should have received towards the end of last week, a Canvas announcement from me reminding you that, we are getting towards the end of the spring semester. And I know in some ways that might be kind of surprising. I mean, given the crazy circumstances that we've had to deal with this semester and moving the class from face-to-face to online, first temporarily and then permanently, and with everything else going on in society right now with the COVID-19 crisis, it kind of feels like the spring semester has been going on for like the last 2 years. But amazingly enough, we are getting towards the end. And so the Canvas announcement from last week reminds you that because the end of the semester is coming up, the due date for the Student's Choice Project is also coming up. And so that due date is in fact next week. It is a week from this Thursday at 11:59 p.m. So again, it is Thursday, the 26th of May at 11:59 p.m. But also remember, for the Students' Choice Project, just like for every assignment that we have in this class, the 3-day grace period policy that I created for this class when we moved online applies, meaning that if you are not able to submit your Students' Choice Project to me by the due date, again, Thursday, May 26th at 11:59 p.m., you will have an additional 3 days, that is an additional 72 hours, to submit the project to me via Canvas. And if you submit the project to me via Canvas during that grace period, I will accept it at full credit, and I will not deduct any points off the top for lateness. So that policy applies for the Students' Choice Project as well as every other assignment in this class. Now, the reason why I sent the Canvas announcement last week to remind you about this is the fact that, well, some of you may not have started the Students' Choice Project yet. And if you haven't, you need to get going. This is not the kind of thing that you want to leave until the last minute. And some of you may have started on the project a few weeks ago, maybe during spring break or something like that, and you kind of got busy with other things and put it aside. So the due date is coming up. Now, if you haven't yet started on the project, please, as soon as possible, go and take a look at the guidelines for the assignment. You can define the assignment guidelines very simply by clicking on the Assignments tab in the left-hand menu of our Canvas homepage for this class, and then scroll down to where it says Students' Choice Project Revised, and click on that. And what you will see there are the general instructions for the project, as well as the 7 different topics that you can choose to complete your project. Now, note, the project was revised when we went ahead and moved this class online permanently for the remainder of the semester. I made adjustments in several of our assignments. Generally speaking, I kind of cut down on some of the workload for you because I thought that was appropriate given the stress of the situation that we were dealing with, and given the fact that the movement online really kind of changed some of what we needed to do in this class. So one thing that you will notice if you are looking at the guidelines for the Students' Choice Project for the first time, that the minimum page requirement for the project has been brought down from what it was at the beginning of the semester when we first talked about the project. So you don't have to do as much writing now as you had to have originally. And also, if you were originally supposed to be doing service learning for the Students' Choice Project, and obviously that whole thing got canceled when Long Beach Unified School District closed schools because of COVID-19, also closed all after-school programs. Your page minimum for the Students' Choice Project is even lower. And that is because I know that a lot of you who were doing Long Beach Blast, doing the mentoring, went through the Blast training program. Some of you may have even started your hours working with your mentor. And so I felt it only appropriate that you have less work to do for the project, since you've already, did some work earlier on in the semester. And I want that to count. I want that to matter. So the page minimum has been taken down for everybody, even more so for former Long Beach Blast mentors. And also I added a couple of additional topics for you to choose from that I thought were particularly appropriate when we are all sheltering in place at home. So take a look at those guidelines. Now, if you have any questions between now and when you turn in your Students' Choice Project, please, please, please reach out to me. Get your questions answered. You can get your questions answered by sending me an email, by sending me a Canvas message, or if you prefer, you can drop in and talk with me one-on-one during my twice-weekly virtual student hours. And remember, my virtual student hours on Zoom take place every Monday and Wednesday afternoon between 2:30 and 3:30 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And if you want to drop in on those student hours and ask me a question, all you have to do is go to our class Canvas homepage, scroll down past the pictures to where it says basic course information. There you will find not only the Zoom link for my virtual student hours, but you will also find the password that you need to plug in to be able to access those student hours. Now, if you want to talk to me one-on-one via Zoom, but you are unable to drop in on Monday or Wednesday afternoons between 2:30 to 3:30 because you have another class or you're stuck at work or whatever your situation might be, just send me an email and a Canvas message. Let me know and give me a few day and time combinations that I can work with. I will find one that works for us. I will set up a custom Zoom meeting for the two of us to talk. I will then send you the link, the Zoom link, and the password for that meeting, and we can have the conversation that we need to have. So any questions about the project, please do feel free to reach out to me. So that's the first thing I wanted to mention. So any general questions about the Student's Choice Project at this time before I talk about the remaining assignment due dates and stuff like that? Anybody? Okay, so as I said, we're almost out of semester. And so aside from the Student's Choice Project, which we just talked about, basically you have 3 more assignments pending for this class, and that is it. The first assignment that most immediately comes due, as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, is your discussion forum post on the judicial branch. And I'll deal with any questions that you have about that in a few minutes. That assignment, of course, is due this Thursday. That is the 21st of May, or pardon me, the 21st of May at 11:59 p.m. Then the next assignment will be the next week, next Thursday, the discussion forum on civil liberties and civil rights. And we'll talk in a little bit more detail about that a little bit later on today. And that assignment will be due, as I said, next Thursday. And that will be the 28th of May at 11:59 p.m. And remember, the 3-day grace period applies to assignments. And then finally, the very last assignment that you will have due in this class to wrap things up for the semester is test number 3. And test number 3 is due on Tuesday, June 2nd. And last week, I went ahead and opened up test number 3 for you on Canvas. So you can go ahead and start taking a look at test number 3 now. Start working on it early if you want to. I would get my Student's Choice Project done first before starting test number 3, but there you go. So test number 3, when you look at it, has the exact same 2-part format as test number 2. Same thing, all the same instructions apply. It is a completely open book, open note test with no time limit, as long as you get it turned in by the end of the grace period, of course. And you'll be choosing any 8 of the terms in part 1 from a list of, I think, 23 terms that I give you. So any 8 terms in part 1 and in about 3 to 4 complete sentences each, you are going ahead and defining that term for me and also telling me how and why that term is significant, why it's important, kind of how it relates to the other stuff that we are talking about in the class. All right. So that's part 1. Each of those 8 terms, as always, is worth 7.5 points. So part 1 in total is worth 60 points. And then part 2, I have 4 mini essay questions there for you to choose from. Please choose and answer any one of those 4 questions and respond in approximately 5 paragraphs. And again, make sure you follow the directions carefully. I had a few students with test number 2 didn't really read the directions. Instead of picking one question out of the 4 and writing a 5-paragraph response, they wrote 1 paragraph for all 4 of the questions. Don't do that. Pick your favorite question out of the 4 in part 2 and give me about a 5-paragraph response. And that 5-paragraph response is worth the remaining 40 points possible for the test. All right. And again, the test is due plus the grace period, of course, Tuesday, June 2nd. So technically speaking, you will have until June 5th at 11:59 p.m. to submit your test number 3 to me via Canvas to receive full credit without a lateness penalty. Okay. Now, one other thing that I should say about the test, and that is, remember, we did make a change in the test this semester. Originally, back when we were face-to-face, we were supposed to have 4 tests. Once we moved online, it made sense to take that down to 3 tests rather than 4. But remember, even though we dropped from 4 tests down to 3, the low score drop policy for this class still applies for the tests, as well as for another assignment category, the group quiz / discussion forum post category. So what that means is at the end of the semester, when Canvas is calculating your final course grade for your 3 tests, it is only counting the 2 tests that you scored the highest on, and it is dropping your lowest test score of the 3 and not counting it towards your final course grade. Same thing for the discussion forum posts and the 1 group quiz that we took while we were still face-to-face. At the end of the semester, Canvas will automatically drop your lowest score from all your discussion posts plus group quiz number 1 and not count it towards your final course grade. Now, that's an important thing to remember, because what that means is that if you missed our group quiz, or if you missed one of the discussion forum posts, no problem. That will be the score that'll drop. It will not penalize you. It will not hurt your grade. Now, as far as the tests go, the low score drop policy gives you a few options that I want to remind you about as we get to the end of the semester. There's 3 possibilities. First possibility is that if you have taken the if you have taken the first 2 tests this semester, and there's 1 test that's the score is lower than you would like it to be, then I would definitely encourage you, take test number 3, do the best job you can with test number 3, and hopefully the test number 3 score will be better, so Canvas will drop that other lower test score and your overall course grade will go up. That's one possibility. Another possibility is if you missed either of our first 2 tests this semester. So if you missed test number 1 that was given in class back when we were still face-to-face, or if you never submitted your test number 2, then take test number 3, and I'll count the 2 tests that you have, and the test that you didn't take will be dropped and will not count against you. It will not affect your final course grade. Then there is the third option, the one that I like the best. If you have taken the first 2 tests of the semester and you have absolutely aced them, you have done really, really well on them. If you feel like you can't score any better on test number 3 than you did on either of your first 2 tests this semester, then you can choose to simply not take test number 3. Don't even bother with it. Don't even submit it to me via Canvas. And that will be the score that Canvas will drop at the end of the semester. And it'll count the 2 test scores that I already have on file for you. So those are the 3 options. So again, remember, the low test score drops automatically at the end of the semester, and your low score from your discussion forum posts and group quiz number 1 also drops. Okay. And looking at my grade book, there are a number of you who have scored so high on test 1 and test 2 that you may want to seriously consider simply not taking test number 3. Because I'm guessing if you've got other classes at LBCC this semester, you've got other tests, other finals. Maybe you have a cumulative final in another class. Maybe you have papers due, projects due, presentations due in other classes. You could have one thing less to worry about if you decide that you don't need to take test number 3. So any questions about anything having to do with test number 3 or about the low score drop policy or anything like that, before we go ahead and move forward. And I am planning a little bit later on today, sending a Canvas announcement out to all of you, reminding you about the low score drop policy for the forum, discussion forum posts and test number 3. And it's kind of recapping everything that I talked about right now. So any questions about test number 3 or any questions about anything having to do with the class at this point, either unmute your mic or put a question in the group chat. Okay, so seeing nothing. Next thing to move on to, thank you, Dolce, got the thumbs up there. I do appreciate that. So next thing we want to talk a little bit about is, remember, this past week, last Tuesday, during our weekly Zoom get together, among other things, I went ahead and talked about a couple of highlights from the topic that you have been learning about over this past week, and that is the judicial branch, the federal court system in the United States. And remember, that is the subject, specifically this thing that we call judicial review. That is the subject of your discussion forum post on the judiciary that is due this coming Thursday at 11:59 p.m. plus the grace period. So if you recall last week, the two main highlights that I pointed out on the judicial branch notes that I gave you on our Canvas modules page was the fact that the framers, when they were creating the federal court system, when they were creating the judicial branch in Article 3 of the Constitution, really didn't sweat the details about the courts at all, okay? The framers, for a couple of reasons, put extremely minimal detail about the structure and function and power and process of the courts in Article 3 of the Constitution. And if you recall, two major reasons why that was. First major reason that I talked about was the fact that the framers were not at all concerned about the courts. They were not scared by the federal courts at all. They believed that the court system in the United States would be the least powerful and the least potentially dangerous of the three national government branches. And so because the framers didn't fear the courts, they didn't see the need to box the courts in. They didn't see the need to very carefully specify what the courts could and could not do to prevent them from spinning out of control and abusing their powers, because they didn't think the courts were ever going to be able to spin out of control and abuse their powers. And we talked about why that was last week, and it's also mentioned for you briefly in the judiciary notes. Now, the other reason why the framers didn't bother to put much detail at all about the courts into Article 3 was because the framers made a big assumption. They assumed that the structure of the U.S. federal court system would basically be a copy, a duplicate of the structure and process of the British judicial system, the British national court system. And we talked about why the framers made that assumption last week as well. And it's mentioned in the notes. Because remember what I said last week, for the most part, when the framers created our new governmental system in our current Constitution back in 1787, the framers tried to create our government to be as distinct as possible, as different as possible from the British model, because they didn't trust the British government. They didn't trust the British king. They didn't trust the British parliament. And you can see why. We had a little problem with them, right? Little thing that led up to the American Revolution and ultimately to independence. But as we said last week, the British court system was the exception. The British judicial system was the only part of the British government that the framers actually trusted, that the framers thought actually was fair and just. And so for that reason, they said, hey, look, why reinvent the wheel? The British court system works really well. It's been working well for over 700 years. So let's just do ourselves a favor. Let's assume that our system is going to be based on the British court model and life will be good. So no need to put a lot of detail in Article 3. But remember why that matters, why that's significant. and we talked about this last week as we were wrapping things up, because the framers didn't sweat the details in Article 3, because Article 3 is extremely short and very vague, that allowed the U.S. Supreme Court, the highest court in the federal judicial system, to invent a massive power for itself in that very famous 1803 case versus Marbury versus Madison. And the power that the Supreme Court invented for itself in 1803 has direct relevance to what you are going to be learning about this next week, dealing with our basic freedoms, dealing with civil liberties and civil rights. And that massive invented power of the courts from 1803 was this thing that we talked about last week. It's talked about in the judiciary notes from this past week, called judicial review. And remember what we said, judicial review has two basic components. The first component is that under judicial review, the federal courts, and in the end, the U.S. Supreme Court, because it's the highest court in the United States, gets to interpret the actual words of the Constitution. So under judicial review, it is the responsibility of the federal courts to tell everybody else in the United States what the Constitution actually says and means in practice, in reality. Now, as we said last week, that in itself is a massive power, right? Because everything that government does in this country is limited and governed by the Constitution. So whoever gets to interpret the Constitution, whoever gets to tell us what the actual words of the Constitution mean, that is a massive piece of authority. But guess what? That is only the first part, the first half of judicial review, because judicial review, as it was established in Marbury versus Madison in 1803, has a second major component. And here it is. Once the courts interpret some words in the Constitution, the courts can then go ahead and strike down. The courts can go ahead and kill, get rid of any action by government that they believe conflicts with their interpretation of the words of the Constitution. So any action by anyone in government, any action of Congress, any action by the American president, any action by any of the 50 state governments, the federal courts can strike those actions down if they believe that action conflicts with the court's interpretation of the Constitution. So you get the idea. Put those two parts of judicial review together, and it's a massive power. Okay? And why do the courts have that massive power? Because the framers didn't sweat the details in Article 3. So there you go. Now, judicial review, as I said, is going to become into play with this week's material, and you'll see how and why judicial review really matters for us as folks living in the United States in the year 2020. Because remember what I said as I was kind of finishing up rapidly last week. Remember what I said? I said that, the power of judicial review gives the courts the ability to transform the lives of everybody living in the United States. Now, that's a big statement, right? That's a really bold statement to make on a Tuesday morning, especially when I haven't had enough caffeine yet, right? So how dare I say that? Why would I say that this judicial review power is so big that it has the ability to transform the lives of everyone living in the United States today? Well, here's why. And it has to do with our basic freedoms. Because as we will talk about in just a minute, all of us living in the United States, not just US citizens, by the way, but everyone living in the United States is entitled to certain basic freedoms. And those freedoms, by the way, are our civil liberties and our civil rights, which we'll define in just a couple of minutes. But here's the immediate question. How do we know, as folks living in the United States, how do we know what our basic freedoms consist of? Well, we know what our basic freedoms consist of because they are all listed in different parts of the U.S. Constitution. Aha! Think about this. Because all of our basic freedoms are listed in different parts of the U.S. Constitution, that also means that in the end, it is up to the courts using their judicial review power to tell us, to tell everyone living in the United States what their freedoms consist of and how far they extend and how and when and why government can limit them and all that stuff. And guess what? As you will see, as you go through the class notes on civil liberties and civil rights this week, as you go through the assigned readings for civil liberties and civil rights for this week, as you look at the crash course videos for this week, you will notice that over time, the courts, and especially the U.S. Supreme Court, will change their mind. In other words, as we move through history from 1803 to the year 2020, the federal courts and the U.S. Supreme Court in particular will reinterpret different parts of the Constitution. And when they reinterpret different parts of the Constitution, they will reinterpret our basic freedoms. So our freedoms aren't static. They change over time. So whenever the Supreme Court reinterprets a freedom that we have, they are changing our lives. They are transforming our lives as folks living in the United States because they've suddenly told us your freedom today is different than it was last week. And that can really be a really big and important shift. And sometimes it benefits, I can't even talk, need more caffeine. Sometimes it benefits us because sometimes the courts will reinterpret our freedoms in a way that makes us more free, gives us more freedom to do something. But other times it reinterprets our freedoms in a way that restricts them, that gives us less freedom than we used to have. So does that make sense? Any remaining questions about anything that we've said either this week, last week, or in any of the assigned readings or videos or notes? Any questions about anything having to do with the U.S. judicial branch and judicial review before we move on and highlight some important stuff about civil liberties and civil rights? Go ahead and open up your mics or go ahead and put your question in the group chat. So anything left about the court system in the United States? We all good? We making sense? I'll take more caffeine now while I can. Okay, so not seeing any questions. So let's go ahead and move on. So, this is kind of a milestone right now, folks. As I said earlier, what you are going to be learning about this week, civil liberties and civil rights, this is the last set of new material that you will be learning about in this class for this semester. Woohoo! Right? And we're really kind of ending the semester with a bang. And we're kind of going back to where we started at the beginning of the semester too, because as folks living in the United States, it is really, really important for all of us to know what freedoms that we have as folks living in the United States and how we know what they are and how and why and when those freedoms can change. So let's go ahead and talk about this. So hopefully you have, I opened up the module on our modules page yesterday for civil liberties and civil rights. And I went ahead and posted 3 crash course videos in that module, but I also went ahead and posted 2 sets of notes for you to look at. We are going to look at the first set of notes that appears in the modules. This is the general comparison of civil liberties and civil rights. These are the notes that has the 2-column table at the very top. And what you see there when you take a look at the top of the general comparison notes is, not surprisingly, a side-by-side comparison of the two types of basic freedoms that we have in the United States. And this is the main point of the notes that I want to go over with you in the time that we have remaining today. Because here's the thing, okay? So often, if you hear our elected officials, on the news, on TV, online, whatever, you hear the president, you hear members of Congress talking about our basic freedoms that we have as folks living in the United States. You hear, news reporters talking about the basic freedoms that we have living in the United States. They make a fundamental mistake. The president, members of Congress, journalists, they forget what they should have learned in Poli-Sci 1. And here it is. Because if you take a look at the notes, and as I've mentioned previously a couple of times this morning, as folks living in the United States, we have two types of basic freedoms. Civil liberties on the one hand, and civil rights on the other. Okay? Now, the mistake that our elected officials and journalists often make is that when they are talking about our basic freedoms, they tend to use the terms civil liberties and civil rights interchangeably. In other words, they think that civil liberties and civil rights are the same thing. Well, guess what? They're not, okay? Now, as I said earlier, civil liberties and civil rights are very similar concepts. They are very closely connected, very closely related ideas, but they are not the same. They are similar, they are connected, they are related, but civil liberties and civil rights are also distinct concepts. They have important differences from each other. And that's one of the most important lessons that you get in Poli-Sci 1, and one that even members of Congress sometimes forget about. They probably weren't paying attention that day, or they skipped class that day. Who knows? You never know with members of Congress, right? Now, the best way to understand the relationship between civil liberties and civil rights is to think of civil liberties and civil rights as being two sides of the same coin. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I have a prop. I have what looks like an ordinary US quarter. In fact, it is an ordinary US quarter. Now, I'm going to try and put this as close to the camera as I can to illustrate what I'm talking about here. So if you take a coin out of your pocket or out of your purse, or you pull one out from under your sofa cushion or something like that, what you will notice is that all coins in the US and most coins in most countries around the world have different pictures, have different images stamped on each side of the coin. So if you look closely at the camera, you can't see my face, which is probably a rewarding thing for you. So you see the front side of the quarter, very distinguished looking member of the framers there. But then if you flip the coin around to the back side, you see a different, and it's upside down, you see a very different image stamped on the back, right? Okay. And that's the way it is with most coins, with all coins in the US and most coins in every other country around the world. You have different images, different pictures stamped onto each side of the coin, okay? Now, this describes the relationship between civil liberties and civil rights. How? Well, because if you think about it, both sides of this quarter are very closely connected. They are very highly interrelated with each other. They are basically fused together, right? There is no way, even if I had a fairly precise laser cutter, there's no way that I could separate the two sides of the coin from each other. I'd probably go ahead and just melt the quarter, and then I'd have nothing, right? I'd lose 25 cents. Not a good thing. So that's the one thing. Civil liberties and civil rights are like that. They are fused together. They are very tightly interrelated, interconnected with each other. But guess what? Just like the two sides of this quarter, right? Civil liberties and civil rights are also distinct from each other. They are different from each other. And here's the key. Both civil liberties and civil rights talk about our basic freedoms, but they talk about our basic freedoms from completely opposite perspectives. And if you take a look at the very top of the general comparison notes for civil liberties and civil rights, if you look at the definitions that I give you for civil liberties in the left-hand column of the table, and you look at the definition for civil rights that I give you in the right-hand column of the table, you'll see what I'm talking about. Both civil liberties and civil rights deal with our basic freedoms, but from opposite perspectives. And here's the difference. Civil liberties represent those things that government cannot do to us. Now listen to that again. Civil liberties are those things that government cannot do to us. In other words, what our civil liberties tell us in the Constitution is that there are certain basic freedoms that we have as folks living in the United States, like our right to free speech, our right to peaceably assemble, talk to other people, that sort of thing. We have certain basic freedoms that government is not allowed to take away from us under most circumstances. That's a civil liberty, a freedom that we have that government isn't supposed to take away from us most of the time. In other words, civil liberties are things that government cannot do to us. Okay? So those are civil liberties. Now, flip over to the right-hand column of the table. Civil rights also deal with our basic freedoms, but civil rights deal with our basic freedoms from the opposite perspective of civil liberties. Now think about this for a second, because we just got through saying civil liberties represent those things that government cannot do to us, right? Civil rights, on the other hand, represent those things that government must do for us. Listen to that again. Civil rights represent those things that government must do for us. In other words, with civil rights, we're saying that government has a positive responsibility to protect our basic freedoms and make sure that other people in society don't take away our basic freedoms from us. See the difference? See the difference between civil liberties and civil rights? Both deal with our basic freedoms, but they deal with our basic freedoms from opposite perspectives. Civil liberty says, okay, government, all Americans have certain basic freedoms, and you, the government, keep your hands off those freedoms. Don't take away those freedoms from the American people. Civil rights, on the other hand, says the exact opposite. Civil rights says, okay, government, all Americans have certain basic freedoms. And guess what? It is your responsibility. It is government's responsibility to make sure that no one in society takes away other people's freedoms. See the difference? Civil liberties, things that government cannot do to us. Civil rights, things that government must do for us. So both deal with our basic freedoms, but from opposite perspectives. They are two sides of the same coin. And as I said, all of our basic civil liberties and civil rights are listed in different parts of the Constitution. The notes go into more details about that. And because all of our basic freedoms, because all of our civil liberties and civil rights are listed in different parts of the Constitution, that means that the courts get to interpret all of them using just review. And as you will see in the notes for this week, over time, the U.S. Supreme Court has reinterpreted certain of our basic freedoms, certain of our civil liberties, and certain of our civil rights. So our freedoms can change significantly over time. Questions, comments, problems about any of that stuff, about this interesting relationship between civil liberties and civil rights? Any questions or comments about any of this stuff? Ask me, open up your mic and ask me, or put something in the group chat. Are we good with this? Does this make sense? Never saw that side of the coin. Thanks, Dolce. I appreciate that comment. Yeah, you'll never look at a coin the same way ever again now, right? Absolutely. All right. So this is where we wrap things up. I'm running 2 minutes over, as I tend to do. I apologize for that. Remember, this Thursday at 11:59 p.m., not counting the grace period, your discussion forum post on the judicial branch is due. Remember, a week from this Thursday, so next Thursday, your discussion forum post on civil liberties and civil rights are due. Your Student's Choice Project is also due again, and there's a 3-day grace period for both of those assignments as well. Questions, comments, problems about anything having to do with the class, or for any reason, if you need to talk with me about any subject, even if it has nothing to do with school, send me an email, send me a Canvas message, drop by during my virtual student hours on Monday or Wednesday afternoons, or arrange a custom Zoom appointment with me so you and I can talk one-on-one, and I can help you. I will help you however I can with whatever you need. All right. So until I see you next time, be safe, be well, and remember, you are going to be successful in this class, and you are going to be successful in getting through this crazy period that we are all living through, because you are not alone. We're all in this together. And remember, I'm with you. I'm behind you. I've got your back. Thanks for joining me this morning. Have yourself a great rest of the week. Take care. Bye-bye.